Okay.
Hello, this is the Surviving Healthcare Podcast, and I have Scott Schroeder and Jeff Martin, both senior orthopedists, on my show today. And Scott is an international expert on the metal reactions in the body due to these implants. And he's had a remarkable career of removing problematic implants and seeing people rise from their disabilities and problems and improve so much. And so, Scott, please introduce yourself. We're all retired, just less than a year or two, and introduce yourself, tell about your background, and then launch into how you came to where you are.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. I was practicing for a little over 30 years, and over those years, I put in thousands of implants, metallic implants into my patients' bodies, and really over the first many years, decade or so, I did, in our medical training, in surgery training, we didn't talk about allergies a whole lot or reactions to the metals. And so, if they bothered people, okay, we get it out. And in foot and ankle region, there's not a whole lot of subcutaneous tissue overlying it. So yeah, many times I'd plan on, getting things out. And then just kind of paid attention over the years. And then about 15 years ago or so, I started, being more cognizant of some of these problems that I was seeing. And so then started looking closer, and then started getting a number of patients where we had, quite dramatic responses after removal, of metals. And so one that I had kind of mentioned to both of you earlier was the patient that ended up being paralyzed after I had placed 4 or 8 small stainless steel screws in his foot, and actually 4 in each foot. And I didn't know he had neuropathy that came on, and he had neuropathy from the knee down. And then his toes were starting to curl from this. And then he had sores on the tips of his toes, which led to infection. And okay, I go, ultimately I said, we got to straighten these toes. And he had some preulcerative lesions, second and third metatarsals. I was going to have to shorten those bones. And, do you know why you have neuropathy first? He goes, no, well, you need to get that checked out. So he went to somebody in our local, and he was an engineer in his 40s. And then he went to University of Washington, okay, idiopathic polyneuropathy, flew himself to Mayo Clinic, idiopathic polyneuropathy. Okay, let's go ahead and proceed. So we went ahead.
Idiopathic means we don't know what the answer is. The doctors don't know. The doctor is an idiot. It's not derived from that, but that's the easy way to remember it. Okay. And Jeff, I forgot to introduce Jeff. Jeff, of course, my listeners know him. He is another senior orthopedist who had a fantastic career in shoulders, knees, and hip replacements. He's another implantologist, just like Scott is foot and ankle implant and correctional surgeon. So sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, yep, no problem. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Bob. I'm happy to be on again, and probably may be good for offering a little perspective on some of this metal implantation that we're discussing today. I did it too for about 35 years, and put a lot of hips and knees and shoulders in, some elbows as well. But that was a crux of my practice. Retired now.
Very cool. So go on, Scott. Sorry to interrupt you there.
And I would have to say, vast majority of these implants, hey, we do great with them. They're life-changing, especially the hips and knees that Jeff had put in, and really get people their lives back. But there's a percentage of these that we can have some issues with. And that's really what I'm talking about, and kind of had an awareness of when I started looking at this. So this particular patient, then I ended up, we straightened his toes out. I put K-wires, pins in his toes, stainless steel, shortened the bones, and he did great. Okay, fine. Pulled the pins at 6 weeks. See you later. Didn't see him back for about 4.5 years or so. And he came back, and then his big toe was starting to curl. And then he was getting a preulcerative lesion at the tip of the toe. We got to straighten that out. Okay, but what's the swelling over where I had these screws? And I started talking about some of the issues I see with some of these metals. And he and his wife looked at each other, but they didn't say anything to me. And so I go, okay, well, we need to, we'll use titanium on your big toe. And I think you may have a problem potentially with nickel with these stainless steel screws. Let's get those out. Bones healed. We don't need them anymore. So that's what we did. So he came back first post-op visit. I usually see him about 5 days, make sure there's no signs of infection, look good. Saw him back at 12 days, and he goes, okay, doc. He goes, being the anal engineer that I am, and he worked with metals all the time. And he goes, I started looking back at when I had all these problems, and I didn't know of his problems at that time. And he goes, I had I had an ACL. I had amalgam fillings. Okay, when I was a kid, and then
those are the mercury fillings that are so toxic.
Correct, about 50% mercury, and then these two gold crowns, and placed years ago. And then I went ahead, and he goes, 8 years ago I had an ACL repair with a titanium screw in my knee. And then he goes, 6 years ago is when I started developing this neuropathy from the foot and then the knee down. He goes, now it's to the point that it's my entire body, including my hands. I can poke myself with a pin in the belly. I can't feel it. I can bite my tongue. I can't feel it. And he goes, I didn't put it together then, but 4.5 or so years ago, you did surgery on my feet. And 3 months later is when I had my first episode of I was paralyzed. I could breathe, but I couldn't talk, and I could not move for 45 minutes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And he goes, I was scared spitless. And because he was laying in bed and his wife was already gone. And he sat and looked at the clock. He could see the clock, but he just had to move it. I guess he could move his eyes, and but that's about it. And then he knew it was 45 minutes because then his body just relaxed, and then he could go again. Well, it progressed to an hour a day, 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day, and he was working. He was working as an engineer, and he was in there with his boss one time, and he just seized up at his computer. And his boss says, you can die here. You need to be, disabled. And so anyway, went back to Mayo Clinic, all this. They diagnosed him with basically idiopathic, in this case, I guess it was episodic spastic quadriplegia.
Once again, just a descriptive phrase without any knowledge about what did it.
Exactly. After looking at it, it's more along the line of stiff person syndrome. Stiff person syndrome, which there really hasn't been any quote, cure, so to speak, for this. And they felt it can be progressive as time goes on. And so anyway, he goes, then, 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, you removed these screws, and it progressed then to 10 to 12 hours every day. Twice he was in the pool because his wife liked to do these little aerobic things in the pool where they're standing. Well, seized up under the water twice. And so his wife had to save him. And but he found that if he kept active, he was good. As soon as you relaxed, then he could seize up. And sometimes at night he'd go and eat. He knows he's going to sit down to eat. He would make sure he's even in bed right afterwards. And then he would just seize up and he'd be gone for the rest of the night. Anyway, he said, you removed these screws from my feet. He goes, overnight, I went from being paralyzed 10 to 12 hours a day to 3 hours a day overnight. And so then I go, okay. And so that's when we sent his blood off to Germany to be tested with the MELISA test, which is a lymphocyte transformation test where they basically take the lymphocytes, which are the inflammatory cells of the body, and challenge it with various concentrations of the metals. And then you'll get what's called a sensitivity reaction to those metals. And then you can tell if they're allergic to the metals or not. And so sent that off, found out he's allergic to nickel as well as highly allergic to palladium. And then he went and researched everything, found out his gold crowns were 26% palladium.
Jeez.
Long story short, got the screw out of the knee, and then he got all of his amalgam fillings out. And the day he got the last palladium filling out, the last gold crown out, he wasn't paralyzed since.
Oh my gosh.
So everything, yes. Jeff, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, that's interesting. So, Scott, I guess most of your experience now is anecdotal, and you're, I guess, trying to, at this point, put together a series maybe that would look at this in greater detail. From a guy who put in a lot of metal, and
me too.
Had lots of patients who had coexisting hardware, maybe from remote fracture, trauma surgery, whatever. And certainly many of us have stainless steel clips in our tissues from soft tissue surgery for vascular, from the vascular standpoint. So it's almost ubiquitous. I mean, if you think of the number that have just hips and knee implants, which I'm assuming is probably the largest number of elective implants patients out there. I can't. I think all of us can think of lots of etiological methods or mechanical or theoretical reasons why these things could occur, but it's not something that I can say I saw a great deal of. And I guess you would have to say, well, the incidence of some of these neurodegenerative conditions is either rising or it's staying the same, but it's been there for a long time, probably even antedated the majority of implant surgery that's been done, which is mostly since the 1960s. So it's kind of hard. It's hard for me to understand this, I guess, in terms of, what is the likelihood? It doesn't discount the possibility, however, of certain people having this happen. How can you identify these people? Is it something that anybody who has those conditions should look into? And I would say, at this point, I don't know enough about it other than what you've said and smatterings of things that I've heard. But yeah, that would make sense to me. I mean, those are serious conditions. I mean, Bob, you look like you're about to say something.
Scott, tell us about the battery effect of having two different kinds of metal in a body.
Well, that's what we're still researching to kind of see how this affects in the body. But in general, what we're looking at when we look at a battery, basically we have the positive side or the cathode, and then the negative side, which is the anode, and in between an electrolyte. And what we're kind of looking at are some of these positive and negative charges of these, like titanium is more positively charged. Stainless steel is more negatively charged. And so we look, okay, and certainly, and I'm sure Jeff has probably heard, at least some of the metal companies now are saying, make sure you don't have a titanium, plate and then stainless steel screws in them because of the potential galvanic reaction between the two. And and actually some of the companies actually have that now listed, even though that was practice. And I think a lot of things that, even like Jeff, you guys had mentioned as far as the, metal on metal hips. I mean, that was state of the art at the time, and then things change. And so I think we just have to kind of stay up with the times on this.
They got horrible problems with the metal on metal hips. They had a lot of blackening of the tissues surrounding it. They had people with a lot of reactions, and they pretty quickly got rid of that one. I remember an orthopedist did that, Jeff.
Yeah, so that really was about the mid 2000s that those started to be implanted with any numbers. And of course, the idea was to try to improve the frictional relationship between the major joint implants like the knees and the hips, because that was and continues to be an issue, mechanical wear over time. And although they did seem to do pretty well in that regard, a number of people reacted to them. And we weren't really quite sure who it was that was going to react, how they might react even initially. But then when we started seeing the reactions, we sort of generally classified them as a foreign body reaction, and lymphocyte mediated tissue changes. But it also was very destructive locally. It wasn't something that created distant problems. Now, what we're talking about today is something that potentially could even be a problem in another part of your body if you have this galvanic reaction occurring. So there's you have to distinguish between a mechanical particulate problems and potential chemical problems, which is what this is. Two unlike metals are not going to be charged the same way. Some of them may be very inert, but they're always going to be a little different. My question to you, Scott, is, okay, you have two different metals in certain quantities in different parts of the body. And we have an electrolyte media, right? That's what the serum in the blood is. Mm-hmm. And so if you have different amounts and you have different distances and different metals, that makes for a lot of factors that could play into who's going to get a reaction and who isn't. I mean, that's just me thinking, I guess, off the cuff right now, because I haven't haven't given a lot of thought to this lately.
Right, right, and that's kind of the point where I was coming from. That one case I just discussed, that was the first case that it even rang in my head that, oh, I had a problem. I put metal in the foot. He got paralyzed. I took the metal out of the foot. Shouldn't the paralysis go away? But it didn't.
Hmm.
And then we found out he was, going on with the gold in the mouth. And after we got that out, then the paralysis went away. Okay, he wasn't paralyzed before I put the metal in the foot. And he had the gold in the mouth then. But so I'm going, what kind of reaction might be going on? Because gold is one of the most noble metals. It's more positively charged. And then the stainless steel is more negatively charged. I'm going, is there a reaction going on between the two of these? And and underneath his gold crowns was all kinds of black corroded tissue, when he got them out. So that was the first thing. And then a patient we were discussing was a gal who actually contacted me regarding her shoulder pain, and ended up having these porcelain fused metal crown in her mouth and these titanium posts from these two foot root canal procedures. And then she had these screws in the foot, two stainless steel screws. So ultimately they didn't want to take him out over there in Pennsylvania, so she decided to fly out and have me do it. And I've known her for a while, so I just had her stay at the house with my wife and I, and then just did it in my surgery center. And but here is what I'm kind of talking about, and it's difficult. Truly, what you need is a zero resistance ammeter, it's called, to really get the current. But we can't do that in the body. So I'm looking, okay, what about voltage? What can we do there? So just to get an idea that, oh, something is occurring here. And like I say, I'm working with some engineers who work on in the body galvanic corrosion right now to try to figure out everything that's going on. But anyway, so here is the patient. This is what I did in the OR here. So here is her. I had my nurse, test the porcelain fused to metal crown. Okay. And remember, the action potential of a nerve fires off at, the baseline resting potential is minus 70 millivolts, and it fires off at minus 55 millivolts. Okay. And that's pretty standard. So anyway, here is her screw in her foot, this stainless steel. So we were trying to figure out how to test this sterilely. Well, we just took a cautery probe, cut the ends off, and then hooked it up to the voltmeter. Okay. So here we are, stainless steel screw. And then here was her reading was, minus 148 millivolts. All right. And then I go ahead and test to the bone where I took the screws out. And then she was afterwards plus 60. So, over 200 millivolt change before and after. And then, I've done a number of these and similar type of things where, we're getting these 200 to 300 millivolt changes. And, that's what we're trying to figure out. Okay, what is occurring? What does this really mean? And, but in her particular case, she could not move her shoulder above the level of her arm, her arm above the level of her shoulder. And so that next morning I went to, okay, I got to bring you to the airport, go down, pick her up. And the incision in the foot was very small, but I go down there and she's tears streaking down her face. And I go, is the foot hurting? What's going on? And she goes, no, but look. And she raised her arm all the way over her head. And she goes, I haven't been able to do this for 2 years. And I go, okay. Anyway, again, long story short, a couple of weeks later, she had to work on one of those teeth, and then boom, seized up the shoulder again. And so then she went through a year, finally got these teeth, both of them ultimately pulled. And she ultimately then had ceramic implants, and then, more of zirconia type crowns or ceramic crowns. So basically ceramic, implants. And to this day, she can raise her shoulder. She has almost full range of motion again. She has 0, before she had 7 to 8 out of 10 pain, and now it's 0 to 1 out of 10 pain. She goes, I don't even really, so, that's the story. Again, anecdotal type things. We're trying to, but it happens, and that's what I've been seeing with these patients. Another patient, same thing. I took screws out of her foot. She would touch a cell phone or anything metal, and her hand would blister, literally blister. Found out she was allergic to nickel. I had stainless steel in her foot. I'd put in there 15 years previous, took it out. Her and symptoms were about 40% improved. But she had a fusion in the meantime also too in her neck with the titanium plate and screws. And so she began talking to the spine surgeon to get it removed. Finally, after about a year, got it removed. And essentially vast majority of her, and she couldn't move her shoulder up either. And the orthopedist at the time said, you know, there's no reason why you should have, I mean, your x-rays look great. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to move this shoulder up. And he couldn't move it up either. And he's a friend of mine. I take him fishing. And, but after she got the neck played out, she goes, I mean, within a very short period of time, all that range of motion came back, no pain anymore. And that's what I'm seeing with a lot of this is it causes basically spasticity of muscle, these reactions we're seeing. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Scott, it's fascinating. Are you implying that this reaction that you're seeing is this always a delayed type of thing? Is it something that people have to have this material implanted in their body for like a number of years? Is that?
Well, I think, you know, we know about allergic reactions, and it's a type 4 hypersensitivity, delayed hypersensitivity reaction. So we know that. And if somebody's like sensitized from having braces previously, and then they are allergic to nickel and then get stainless steel put in their body, you know, a lot of things, a lot of questions I always ask the gals, you know, how do you do with earrings, you know? And typically it relates to a nickel type sensitivity. So I think there's that part, but then the potential galvanic side, I think, throws a monkey wrench into everything.
Yeah, the reason I brought that up is because, as you know, there's so much in orthopedics that we must do, and it involves implantation of stainless steel or titanium and so forth, just mainly trauma work. But if it's a matter of how long it's there and whether or not it needs to be removed, obviously you and I both know there's things that we put in that we would rather not have to go back after again. But yeah, I mean, it's, you could make the case for explantation of a lot of materials. That's for sure.
Let me ground this thing with a couple of footnotes, and that is, first of all, nickel allergy is 15%. Is that what you said, Scott? 15 or 20%?
It depends on the study. 15 to 18%. You
Right.
know, and the FDA, what they look at.
The big elephant in the room is these mercury and amalgams, and 50% of the dentists in the country have renounced their mercury amalgams. Mercury is a tremendously toxic substance, and 50% of these fillings are made of mercury. And, you know, I don't know whether you guys know, but if you break a mercury thermometer on the floor of the hospital, they clear the floor out, get the hazmat people in there. It's so toxic. And so there are these, quote, biological dentists who are making a lot of people feel better by taking out all of their mercury amalgams. And I found out 2 weeks ago that I have 17, and they were all put in by one dentist in a 2-year period when I was a kid, Jeff, in where we lived in Kent. So they're the largest mercury exposure to people all over the world. It's a tremendous problem, and the dentists are denying it, and it's basically freaking terrible. And I want Scott to comment about the possibility that these things are off-gassing more avidly. They're creating vapors when you get more metal installed in your body because of these currents. And mercury toxicity is, you know, we all know that surgery is a tremendous placebo, and that stories like these are possibly placebo, but Scott has a massive number of stories, and it certainly doesn't sound like any kind of placebo to me. I mean, these are neurological symptoms and all kinds of things. And so go ahead and develop all that, Scott. Thank you.
Well, you know, and that again is a hypothesis that we're working on and trying to get I want physical type evidence, you know, the best we can get. And it's you know, that's what we're striving for. But a number of these cases, I'll actually let you listen. This is a voice memo of a patient who I put titanium plates and screws in her foot in June. Okay. And she ended up having some some issues, definite issues here, but I'm just going to let you listen so you can actually hear from one of these patients what was occurring with this.
All right, so you had some reconstructive right foot surgery with titanium plates and screws, and just recently, this last week, we got the plates and screws out. And prior to that, what did your body feel like?
Since June, I have been experiencing all over body pain, fatigue, joint stiffness, and then nerve pain in the foot and going up the leg to the back.
And what about your focus or?
I've been in kind of a brain fog since the surgery. I thought it was the anesthetic for quite a while, but 4 months later, it really hadn't worn off much. I wake up in the morning and I feel like I haven't rested at all. I get home at night and I just can do nothing because just going to work has been enough, and it's just been mentally taxing.
And since getting the hardware out, what have you been feeling?
The first thing I noticed when I went home was a lot of energy and feeling like I just was thinking clearly. Other than the local pain from the surgery, the overall body pain was gone. My back pain was gone. The nerve pain is gone. The aches, the joint pain, all gone.
All right, thanks.
So, I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, that's a pretty common story with what I'm
So
seeing.
you've been doing this for 15 years and you've seen hundreds of these people that improved
no.
after.
No, and I wouldn't say hundreds, but no, I mean, I've removed, like say over the past 10 years, I removed over 1,000 implants in over 400 patients, and some, and at least in those patients, and some of them were just mechanical reasons, and actually my recommendation after a period of time when I was seeing these patients come back after 10, 15, 20 years to get hardware out, I said, and in Europe, actually the Pew Synthes rep in our area said in Europe, I mean, this is temporary fracture fixation. They take this stuff out after the bone's healed. You don't need it anymore. But in this country, we don't because, we're all busy. We don't want to have a second surgery, or it's difficult to get out, as Jeff had mentioned, and it can be a real pain. And so we don't, but we just leave it. Well, in the foot, especially when we have these titanium plates and locking plates and screws and stainless steel, I mean, they're a little bulkier, and so they can rub and irritate and chew. So I was getting vast majority of the hardware out after I'd put it in, and they didn't have to get it out. That was certainly their choice. And so then I would get to see all this, and some of these things we didn't even know occurred. And then I'd start asking more questions, and I couldn't tell them, oh yeah, that's going to go away when I take it out. I go, well, we'll see. And sure enough, then some of these, we get a number of these, but probably as far as, quote, in those 400 patients, quote, life-changing symptoms were probably I just actually calculated that as about 7.5% life-changing of, something that was really like this gal, really affecting her on a daily basis. And I'm going to have to put the whole series together to really come up with true percentages, but yeah.
So the biological dentists are the dentists who remove all the hardware in the mouth on the theory that it will affect their general health. And they're pretty successful. I mean, it's remarkable when you hear those stories. I mean, they frequently have people that they've, operated on for a day or an afternoon or whatever it takes to pull out all those darn amalgams, and their mercury exposure goes down, and they feel a lot better. So you've been hanging out with them. Do you have stories about the dentists and the interactions with the orthopedic appliances?
Right. Well, and actually the reason I brought this particular patient up is that she also had amalgam fillings. Okay. And
amalgam is a silver filling with the mercury in it. They call them silver, but they're not really silver. They're mercury.
They're grayish mercury.
Yeah.
Right.
Clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
so
copper and tin and mercury are the main ingredients in those. Yeah. And, I'm not a dentist, but, I have worked with a number of the dentists, over the years on this. But and that a lot of those symptoms that she described are the same symptoms that my dentist colleagues describe from mercury issues. So then that brings up okay, is it just the titanium or is not the titanium? Is it a reaction with the mercury? And then like you were talking about, is it, releasing more mercury into the system? I think that's what we're kind of, trying to look at to see could there be a possibility here. And mhm.
And the engineer you were talking about from Washington had some sort of meter that he could measure the off-gassing of the mercury?
Oh, yeah. Yes, they had a biologic type dentist practice that he then became the manager of after his wife almost, they felt that she almost died from mercury toxicity, after her amalgams. And so he quit his practice, or his job to be, to basically protect her. And so I think one of only 10 or 8 or 10, offices in the country that had this device. They actually used it in a mine. You heard of canary in the gold mine, right? Or the coal mine, I guess. And so it actually parts per billion or something, a million or billion of the mercury vapors, and it can detect
that.
mercury. Yeah, and he can hold it in front of somebody with a mercury filling, and then he can see the vapor. He can detect that. Yeah, each breath.
So
is what he described.
Jeff, just to bring us back down to earth, in your practice career, you only saw a few of these cases where they had a lot of problems with the metal implant, and they felt better when they got them out.
That's true. And it was mostly a local reaction. At least that's what we thought. We would get sort of low-grade symptoms, mostly pain, what you might expect from low-grade inflammation. You wouldn't see a lot of swelling or redness or things like that, but it was pain, and it was not something that was easily seen on an X-ray, which is what we relied on to evaluate our implants from a mechanical standpoint. It wasn't hard to, for the most part, prove that it was not infectious. I mean, so that was something we could rule out, but the actual establishment of the diagnosis of a foreign body reaction, we often couldn't do other than doing tissue biopsies or doing the surgery and going in there and exploring it, which was what was done early on. As we got further along, we could see that there was long-term X-ray changes of local tissue reactions, but that was in the worst cases. So there were sometimes patients who went several years with low-grade symptoms that we just couldn't justify doing repeat surgery, couldn't diagnose it. So we had people live with it. Now, that doesn't mean that I know what the problem was. Was it something like this? It's certainly possible. But there were a number of people who had such severe reactions. And I would say probably at a half a dozen to a dozen in my group, we had 3 implant surgeons who were busy, that I think all of us would agree were truly allergic type reactions. And they improved when we went to a more inert material, when we did the revision surgery.
Scott has been lecturing around the world with us. I want to hear what it's like and what he's said to these audiences, and whether he's received with hostility or received with generosity by the corporate people who are managing these and selling these darn implants.
Well, I try to avoid them.
It's very hard.
No. It's interesting. They, obviously there's a vested interest, right? And I'm not about that. I don't want to ever be sponsored by anybody. I'm doing this for the patients, and because I've experienced it in my own family and what have you, and so have seen it firsthand. And then with my patients also, and it's all about that. So I think it's new. It's what I'm presenting is really new, and everybody has to kind of think about it. And okay, is that possible? And of course, there's going to, people have been trained a certain way, and no, forget it, that type of thing. But I keep bringing things out. So overall, it's positive. I guess probably the groups that bring me in to talk, like the ceramic, dentists, implantologists, biologic type dentists and what have you, those groups. Others are, systemic effects of metal allergies. I mean, that was the whole in London when I went out there. That's what the whole seminar was. So everybody, was presenting from kind of around the world on that. And so then everybody's listening. And again, it's newer, so to speak. even though it may have been around. And a lot of things, I mean, why would I, as a foot and ankle surgeon, ask somebody if they have, dental, metals? Or why am I asking them if they have headaches or what are your other symptoms? Stiff neck, it was a common one. And I took the implants out, stiff neck goes away. Headaches, rashes on other parts of their body, that the rheumatologist knew I was working with these patients. And I didn't even know this patient had a rash on her trunk. And we were planning on getting the metal out anyway. And he says, "Oh, you're working with Dr. Schroeder? Okay, well, let's just see what happens after he gets that plate and screws out." And literally 5 days later, it was gone. And she had it for months that she was seeing him for. But then, and that's, kind of more standard for some of these allergic reactions. But I do have a case that kind of ties us all together. This patient had amalgam, and she had some titanium hips. And so she came to me. I don't remember why, but she had a screw in her foot and she just wanted it out, And so I'm going to let you listen to her, and then I'd be interested in Jeff's comments regarding this. And this is one of the earlier ones too. So, and prior to seeing me, she had already got her amalgam fillings out, and she had a nickel allergy. We knew that. So.
All right. So you had hip replacements. When was the first one?
The first one was 2000. They were both in 2014. They're just 2 years old, and they were 4 months apart.
Okay. And then after the first one, did you have many problems with the hip?
The first one I did not. As soon as I had the second hip put in, I had major changes. First, personality, food issues, rashes, and then the chronic hip pain started in.
Okay. And then what are these hips made out of?
These hips are titanium hips with a ceramic ball.
Okay. And then you had actually surgery on your foot in a single stainless steel screw approximately how many years ago?
That was in 2001.
Okay. And so then just looking at your issues, we decided to, get the screw out of the foot. And that was a couple weeks ago.
10 days ago, yeah.
10 days ago, okay. And so what have you noticed? What are some of your symptom changes you have noticed since then?
Oh my gosh. And it's not just me noticing it. It is family members, coworkers, etc. I can actually turn my neck now without having chronic neck pain. I have not had a headache in 2 weeks. My personality is a total 180. I smile. I'm happy. I get accused of drinking way too much coffee because I'm excited about life. I'm not depressed. I don't cry. I have energy, and I'm a changed woman. 100% changed.
All right, neat. What about then your hip pain? What do you notice there? What kind of pain did you have since the hips, when they started hurting? What was the pain like? What scale, on the scale of 1 to 10?
Okay, first off, I'll say about a few months after the second hip was put in, I went on pain pills. And my pain level was always between a 4 and a 7. And I'm talking every day, 7 days a week. And I have not taken a pain pill since after surgery, just due to my foot, hurting a little bit, and haven't taken one since. And I had 0 hip pain at this point, 0.
I can't explain it totally. I don't know, but that's some of the things that I've seen. That's what my colleague, the immunotoxicologist from Europe, Dr. Vera Stetskal, was talking about, what they were seeing with some of the dental metals they removed, and then some of this chronic pain in the hip or knee would significantly improve or go away. And she was the first one to lead me to that. And then sure enough, I started asking these questions, and I'm seeing some of that too. But I don't know, Jeff, what do you think?
Well, that's very interesting. I was just going to say, maybe we need to perhaps clarify. There's a difference between implant allergies, actual true allergies, like you said, type 4 allergies, where you have a reaction, hypersensitivity reaction to the metal. And you also have what I believe was fairly common, a particulate reaction that comes from metal breakdown. Now we're talking about a mercury amalgam reaction that breaks down and releases mercury, a neurotoxin that is creating these problems. At least I'm this is what I'm gathering from our discussion today. And so you're focusing on metal interactions within the body with coexisting mercury amalgam. And I interestingly enough, I was just thinking about when I heard this, when I was back in my teens, I think I was told, I remember that mercury amalgam fillings last about 25 years, and then they mechanically break down. And I've had at least one removed because of that. That was the reason that I was given. And, it was sort of black and cracking and, kind of, you could see it. It didn't look healthy. And the dentist said, well, okay, now this is creating local reaction in the tissue, and you're getting a little bit of decay around it. So, that may be happening spontaneously. I'm thinking of all the factors that could be related to why some of these people are getting it and others maybe not getting it, as I was alluding to earlier. But what do you think is that something that you were aware of, that these things normally are meant to last about 20 to 25 years?
They're definitely, I just read 2 dental books and they definitely break down. It doesn't.
Yeah, well,
and I was thinking about my 17 amalgams. I was reading that. I said, oh no, they're all breaking down.
Well, but the interesting thing is they're subjected to tremendous mechanical stresses. 25 years of that kind of mechanical stress. I would have think they would have broken down long before that. Is it because of galvanic?
Jeff he was a much better medical student than I was. I think you were 1 point away from being an AOA, and your wife, of course, was an AOA, right? And so I want you to see, we're going to test Scott. We're going to test Jeff to see if he remembers the thing about the memory device to know what the symptoms of mercury toxicity are. And it ends with mad as a hatter. And I think it's hot as a hare, or is another one. Jeff, do you remember the rest of it? You're on the clock now.
I'm telling you, when I was a kid, we would break a thermometer and play with the mercury in our
Yeah, I know. We would too. We had great times as kids. We made our carts and went in and out of the driveway. Anyway, so do you remember the acronym or the thing, Scott?
All I know, it wasn't good.
It wasn't good. Yeah, mercury is tremendously toxic. It's a great imitator as far as the symptoms go. A lot of the symptoms are neurological, and they just feel fatigued and crappy all the time. So, but you said that you had people with tremors get better after you've seen them after they had their mercury amalgams removed or your hardware removed.
Right. So when I lectured in London, a oral surgeon presented after me, and he was in Spain, and so he presented, and I was presenting kind of on some of the galvanic concepts at that point in time. And he said, I presented in the morning, he presented just after. He said he went back because I talked to him after, he went back at lunch and added some of his galvanic stuff into his talk, because sometimes it's considered a little bit of voodoo or what have you. But he then was presenting, he would take all these metals out, and then a lot of times you'll have erosion of bone, and he'd reconstruct the jaw, heal the bone, and he'd use titanium plates and screws to do that. But then he would take those out, right? And then he would implant and whatever with ceramics and whatnot. But what he kept bringing up time and time again is Parkinson's symptoms disappearing.
Wow.
And I go, oh, so you can treat Parkinson's? And he goes, no, it's Parkinson's like symptoms, because it's hard to diagnose, right? And you'd look at mercury, what is it? It's a neurotoxin. And so what's going to affect, and that's what I think we'll start seeing some of these tremors and that type of thing. And I've seen that and I can only say so much, but, to people, but I see, okay, they have their mercury fillings and then they have something else placed in the body. And then afterwards they start having tremors. And, but yes, I've seen things that have then improved. I always hate to say, everything's going to go away type of thing, and you don't know until or you get something removed to see if that can occur or not.
I've had an intention tremor dramatically worsened since I got my shoulders. I had a very, very low grade thing for years, and who knows, maybe that's what this is, but I think I'm off to see the biological dentist.
And you want to, and they'll use what's called SMART technique, and it's an acronym, but for trying to safely remove the mercury. And I've actually had I had a patient that was hospitalized.
Mercola got kidney damage because he went to a dentist who was not a biological dentist, and he had mercury exposure when he had about 24 amalgams, and he had it removed as an adult, and he was very sick.
Well, and I think a lot of times they won't do them all at once. A lot of the they'll do different quadrants and what have you, or just part, because of that potential load. And I think even, you do it safely, but, I mean, it's probably only so much safety. I mean, you do as best you can, right? And like when we're removing plates and screws, we're using a stainless steel instrument, with a Torx head or something and we're removing it, but we're having metal on metal. And so then, I'm flushing and all this and, trying to get everything out that I may have torqued. And sometimes there's bone overlying some of these. So you have to burr and miss the plate and whatnot. And then, make sure you flush all the stuff out. So there's always probably going to be a little bit of a load, but you try to do the best you can to have as minimal load as possible.
Of course, in the mouth, they have all these chronic infections. And that's another horror show about dentistry is the root canals are many, many, many times chronically infected, and those produce all kinds of biological effects and nasty things. And I mean, these biological dentists just think that they're heresy to put in a root canal because there's no way they can sterilize it or keep it sterile. Unlike, I mean, you guys never saw infections. How many infections do you see in your whole career, Jeff?
Oh, we've seen infections, Bob. There are cases where we probably haven't been able to diagnose the infection, but we suspected it. It's interesting. You talk about the infections in the root canals, and they talk about the gut flora possibly being altered by things that are occurring elsewhere, distant foci of infection, like a root canal. And root canals can be infected, as I understand it. I'm no authority on it, with very little symptoms, with people really not even being aware of it. So I don't know. There's a lot of complex interactions, and I think we're probably just sort of scratching at the surface on a lot of this stuff. But it is very interesting, and I, particularly from someone who put a lot of metal in, I guess.
Me too.
Yeah, right.
Is there really a pecking order between the knee and the hip and the foot orthos, or not? You're kidding about that, weren't you, Scott?
We're just a little higher altitude. That's all.
Yeah. Oh, there's, I don't have much of an ego at all, so I don't worry about it. And there's always going to be something out there and whatever. I mean, everybody's always trying to do just the best they can. And I mean, I have a lot of all different types of friends, general surgeon friends, orthopedic friends, and like I say, take them out fishing and do stuff and have a good time. So, but one point, actually, the book Mercury Free that's out there, they were describing as far as when these amalgams start breaking down is actually 10 years. They'll start, 10 years, right? So that's been a good book as far as having the whole kit and caboodle there for looking at this the mercury problem and toxicity. And to Jeff's point, I kind of look at five different ways to have problems with metals in your body. 1, mechanical, okay, right? Irritation, impingement, what have you. 2, infection. 3, toxicity, or the metal ions and the metallosis that you were discussing. 4 then is the type 4 delayed hypersensitivity reactions. And then 5, which I think we know, we're trying to learn more about, is the galvanic reactions. 5. Do you have any others that you might put in there, Jeff?
No, I think you pretty well covered everything that I would have thought of. We don't implant lead, but there are certainly, I guess, metals that are toxic that you could have implanted, say, like, somebody gets in an altercation. But, you have to include things like that could be related. We don't generally, as a trauma, with my trauma background, which was my internship, basically, we saw lots of people with shotgun injuries. You don't go after every bit of buckshot in the body. So there are people running around there with actual metal that is toxic in the long term.
Yeah.
The two books I read were Toxic Teeth, How a Biological Holistic Dentist Can Help You Cure Cancer, Facial Pain, Autoimmune, Heart, and Other Disease Caused by Infected Gums, Root Canals, and Jawbone Cavitations, and Toxic Metals. So that was horrifying, frankly. I'm never going to trust anything that happens in the dental office again. And the other one was called Chew on This But Don't Swallow. And that was by a dentist with decades of occupational mercury exposure. And she had her blood work checked at a seminar and was diagnosed with a lymphoma. And immediately after removing her root canals and amalgams, she was cured and her blood work normalized.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Do you guys think we missed anything important? Anything we should cover?
Well,
Just
I applaud your research. I think that's it's an amazing thing to think about, and it just opens a whole new vista of investigation. I think, honestly, your anecdotal experience is amazing.
well,
So much of what we seem to be uncovering is anecdotal now, and I think a lot of things do start that way. But boy, with the COVID experience and what we thought was conventional wisdom and so forth in medicine, we're sort of forced to look more closely at anecdotal experience because of the trustworthiness of the sources that we've traditionally gone to. Sometimes.
There are no studies anymore, Jeff, as we discussed before we went on. There are no good studies because they're all funded by industry and they're all basically adulterated. They're ruined by the funding and the bribery.
Thank God for your curiosity.
well, that's what, like I say, I want nothing to do with anybody that says, oh, I want to, they said, oh, you should develop some ceramic implants. And I go, no, I'm compromised then. And that's not what this is about. This is about the patients and the stories that I get but we want to do it on a bigger scale now though, I mean, I've been helping people when they come to me from around the world. But we're trying to at least get something that's more concrete with some of the research we're trying to do in the lab and that type of thing. So, we'll see. Time will tell.
Well, guys, I'm very grateful for your time, and I think we had a great session. I'm sure I can never tell what the listeners are going to like, but I'm sure they're going to love this one. So thanks again.
Hey, Bob, quick disclaimer. My background there, this is my wife's computer. She works for WashU. I should have announced that at the
It's not,
outset.
Jeff actually is attempting to change his gender subtly here by calling himself Ann
Well,
instead of Jeff.
I was with WashU for the last 5 years of my practice, but I'm not currently. So
All right.
your audience,
I'm going to send you an image of a man chest feeding, and it's a statue in Sweden, and I'm sure you'll appreciate the importance of us understanding that. All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
All right. You bet.